interest in this way.
Order still insisted, James Purnell.
Well, it started late and overran a little bit. It's gone 12:30 now. That brings us to the end of Prime Minister's questions. Only one more to go next week. There you go. Then it'll be Christmas. We said the economy was going to dominate the exchanges. It did, both with Mr. Cameron and the Prime Minister and with Mr. Clegg and the PM too. We'll hear what our panel thought of it in a minute, but let's hear what you were saying to Anita on the emails.
Well, G. Phillips from Sussex says, why can't Gordon Brown answer a question with a straight answer? It's just a reference to the 80s and it's a cheap shot he uses with the opposition every time. Thomas says, if you read one more missive from anyone complaining about the PM not answering a question, I'm going to make the journey down there and black the eyes of a lot of you. Ooh. You tell me if anyone will seriously say the next incumbent, whoever they may be, will act any differently.
Is that signed Sarah Brown?
Thomas. Thomas, very strong and very scary. Bell
Thomas
writes,
McAvoy, probably the government deputy chief whip.
another one here saying Cameron's poll rating has gone down ever since he's been forced to discuss Tory proposals on real issues, the financial crisis, rather than just rubbishing Gordon Brown. He looks all out at sea. And then one that just came in towards the end, I've heard Gordon Brown saying that he's leading the world recovery. Well, it was him that led the country into debt. Now he's leading pensioners into penury by slashing the interest rates on their savings. Why should we suffer? We are probably the most financially responsible element of society.
Okay. We saw, Nick, didn't we, just what a bear pit Prime Minister's questions can be, and how one slip, one wrong word, which is only human, can turn it into a disaster for you.
And I think it will be a disaster for Gordon Brown because that clip will be played again and again. We not only save the world. He could have made a joke about it afterwards. You know, I'll get round to that next week. Yeah, exactly.
Which is what Mr. Blair would probably have done.
For his enemies, and in the world of the internet now, there are plenty of people who will take footage like that and just distribute it. For his enemies, that is a gift because what it says is hubris. And he will regret it. Now, of course, there was substance to the argument too. There was an argument about really whether it's monetary change that is needed. That's the Conservative argument, that it's all very well having rescued the banks, but they're not doing enough. So there was a substantive argument in there too. But I suspect all that will stick in the minds in a week or two is that phrase, we not only save the world, from Gordon Brown, which he'll be reminded of again and again.
Putting aside the showbiz element of that, Nick was talking about there, the government line now, particularly Mr. Brown's line, that you are the do-nothing Tories.
Yes.
Whether right or wrong, is quite politically damaging, is it not?
Well, if it were true, then it would have an effect. But one of the reasons why it won't have the effect that Gordon Brown hopes it will is because it isn't representative of the facts. David Cameron took all his questions as an opportunity to ask the Prime Minister to do something different and to do something that the Conservative Party has proposed. In the debate on the Queen's speech last week, a Labour backbencher asked David Cameron to mention 5 things that the Conservatives would do to ameliorate the recession, and David gave him a list of 5. Now, you, Andrew, and Caroline are perfect at liberty to say that they're not up to much, or they're wrong, or they're overambitious, or whatever. But it's not inactivity. One of the things about Gordon Brown is that he always attempts to caricature his opponents, and he does so by creating these false dividing lines. He did it to the SNP in the debate over who was going to take control in the Scottish Parliament. He does it to minor parties. He's done it to every previous Conservative leader. That's his style. Now, my own view is that the electorate are more sophisticated and more intelligent than to fall for such a blunt and bogus set of dividing lines.
Caroline, the greatest danger the government probably faces in political terms is just the daily drumbeat of miserable economic news, that it just becomes overwhelming in the end. And in a way, there's not that much you can do about that at the moment. Your fiscal stimulus may or may not, but it may have an impact in the third quarter of next year, which is what Mr. Darling hopes it would do. But for now, the sort of the die is cast in a way, isn't it? It's a difficult time.
Well, I think it is a difficult time, and I think it's going to get tougher, to be honest, and I think that's acknowledged by the government as well. I think what we need to see is some of the different announcements made. We were talking about housing earlier, about them being delivered on the ground, and I think Gordon Brown, as well as everybody else in the government, is aware that we're not ever necessarily going to take away the pain from everybody, and it's going to be difficult. But what are we doing to limit the damage, not just for families, but for businesses as well? And Michael, I have to say, you know, in terms of politicians and accusing Gordon of characterising other opposition. They all do that in different ways. You have within, I'm sure, Tory Central Office, a list of things which you say, this is how we want to characterise Gordon Brown.
Mr Cameron did
But the issue is the
government today of, quote, bankrupting the country.
Yes.
Many people have real reservations about the amount of debt the government is going to rack up in the next couple of years. That's a different matter from, quote, bankrupting the country. You know as well as I do that Britain is not going bankrupt.
Well, we have £1 trillion of debt. The pound's been falling in the international markets. Every independent institution that takes a view on these things, the IMF and the European Commission and others have said that we're going to have a deeper and a longer recession here than anywhere else.
Sure.
And actually the level of debt in the country and the economy is about the same as it was in the 1970s when the IMF were called in. So that's a pretty bleak picture. Now, there's
it's
a
not
difference.
bankruptcy, though.
Well,
I mean, that's inflammatory language, Michael Gove, and you know it.
And it's talking down.
You can take the view, many economists do, it is seriously dangerous borrowing. It is too much.
Yes.
We are overextending on borrowing.
okay, I'll settle for that.
All right, but that's not what your leader said. He said bankrupt.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what he did was he encapsulated in a pithy phrase what everyone recognises, which is the way.
Accurate.
No, I think entirely
Michael,
accurate. If we're the country which went into this recession with a bigger deficit than I think any other country apart from Pakistan, Hungary and Egypt, and we've now got £1 trillion of debt, then I think it's perfectly possible for us to say that the country's bankrupt. The Times newspaper, objective organ, when we had the pre-budget report...
Hold on, you're right for it.
Absolutely, that's why it's objective. At the time of the pre-budget report, its front page coverage showed Britain going deeply into the red. That's where we are.
All right.
So, you know...
Nick, you're sitting there looking inscrutable, I may say.
I don't think I wish to be an umpire on which political party distorts their opponent's policies more.
That could take
than
you all
the other.
day.
I do think it is an interesting thing to note, though, that David Cameron, in a way, gave away the damage that Tories fear this do-nothing label is using, because listen now to what his punchline was. The punchline where Tory MPs chanted was, he said, what have the government done about blah, and people shouted nothing. What he was trying to say is, it's not us that are doing nothing, it's the government who are doing nothing in that area, and it did show a kind of perception, if you like, of vulnerability. Of course, we are, in a sense, odd to say, but true, in the easiest time for a government. We're on the brink of the crisis, on the brink of the worst news, in which there's a maximum premium on being seen to do something, activity and summits and announcements and so on, and as a result, Gordon Brown's ratings have gone up. There's no doubt David Cameron's have also gone down, and people say of him that he's not had a great war. That's his own supporters say that. But the next year will be a period we expect.
It will be these measures that have been announced, how they get delivered on the ground.
If they don't work, the government's finished.